Patricia's notice slapped against my chest before I could even open the screen door. She stood there on my porch, her lips curled into that smug half-smile that always seemed carved into her face. "Your niece's clothing doesn't meet neighborhood standards," she said, her tone flat and dismissive, as if the matter was already settled. My niece Sophia was inside, just a teenager wearing shorts and a t-shirt on a hot summer day. Patricia acted like she was policing a courtroom, not a neighborhood. I didn't flinch. I held the paper between two fingers and let her watch me glance at it. Then I let out a short laugh. "Funny thing, Patricia," I said, my voice calm, almost too calm. "I've spent the last 20 years writing and tearing apart rules like these. You're trying the wrong angle with the wrong man." Her smile faltered just slightly, like she'd stepped into mud she hadn't seen. That shift, that hesitation, was enough. It was the kind of moment where the balance of power teetered, and for once she wasn't the one holding the weight. If you've ever felt that surge of power when standing up to bullies, hit subscribe now. This showdown is about to become a masterclass in fighting back. I steadied my voice, pulling the focus back to me. "My name's Daniel Ruiz," I said. "I'm not just some homeowner you can box in with threats. This house belonged to my parents. My mother planted that rose garden right there 30 years ago. And you're standing on the steps of a lawyer who knows exactly how these games work." She blinked, trying to keep her composure, but I could see the tightness in her jaw. I wasn't bluffing. She knew it too. I looked past her, out toward the rose garden at the edge of the lawn. The blossoms were heavy with late summer color, their scent sharp and sweet in the air. My mother had cared for them until the week she died. After her funeral, Sophia had taken over trimming, watering, nurturing every plant. That garden wasn't just decoration. It was a promise, a living piece of family history. And now, Patricia was trying to stain it with threats of decency violations. I thought of my sister, Sophia's mother, who had asked me one thing before she passed away: take care of them. It wasn't just about a roof or food or money. It was about dignity, about safety, about protecting Sophia from anyone who would make her feel small or ashamed. Every letter Patricia shoved in my face wasn't just ink. It was an attack on that promise. Inside the house, I heard the faint sound of Sophia moving in the kitchen. She had no idea what Patricia was trying to drag her into. The thought of my niece overhearing this nonsense twisted my stomach with anger. Patricia's notice was more than harassment. It was invasive, predatory, and I wouldn't let it slide. I let the silence stretch between us until Patricia shifted her weight. Her arrogance was slipping, and she knew it. She cleared her throat, reaching for that commanding tone again. "These rules aren't rules," I cut her off, folding the notice neatly in half without looking away from her. "They're paper, nothing more. And I promise you this, Patricia, you just picked the wrong person to screw with." The cicadas droned in the trees above us, a low, buzzing rhythm that filled the pause. Patricia took one step back, her chin stiff, her eyes hard. She thought she had me cornered, but I could see it, the flicker of doubt she was trying to bury. "Where are you watching from?" This was just the beginning. Patricia thought she'd rattled me with a piece of paper. She had no idea that what she started on my porch was going to shake the entire foundation of Willow Creek Estates. The smell of grilled chicken and charcoal hung in the air as I stepped into Carlos and Marisol's backyard. They'd invited half the block for a Saturday cookout, the kind of gathering Willow Creek Estates used to pride itself on before Patricia and her board poisoned the air. Kids darted between folding chairs, chasing each other with water balloons. A speaker hummed with old salsa tracks, slightly distorted from too much bass. On the surface, it looked like a normal summer evening, but the hushed voices, the sidelong glances, they told me people were carrying more than paper plates tonight. I balanced a soda in my hand and tried to blend in, but Carlos wasn't having it. He nudged me toward a cluster of neighbors by the fence. "Daniel, they need to hear what happened to you this week. You're not the first." His tone was low, but firm. I hadn't planned to make speeches, but the moment I mentioned Patricia's so-called decency notice, the circle erupted. A woman named Beth shook her head hard. "She fined my daughter for leaving her bike on the driveway for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, said it was a visual obstruction. Last winter, another man said, my mother's holiday lights got flagged. Too many colors. She cried for days after the letter came. The stories came rapid, each sharper than the last. A shed painted slightly off shade. A dog too loud, though no one else had complained. A teenager told to remove a poster from her bedroom window. Every word tightened the knot in my chest. Patricia wasn't protecting community standards. She was manufacturing control. I caught Sophia's gaze from across the yard. She stood near the drink table with Marisol, trying to smile, but her eyes betrayed the truth. She felt like a target. It hit me then that this wasn't just an isolated act of cruelty. Patricia had been building a pattern, one neighbor at a time, wearing them down until compliance felt easier than resistance. Carlos leaned close, lowering his voice. "You're the first one who might actually push back. Everyone else here has jobs, families, bills. They can't afford to fight. But you—" He didn't finish the sentence, but I knew what he meant. My law degree wasn't just paper on the wall. It was a weapon Patricia hadn't counted on. Still, the air wasn't only heavy with fear. There was something else, resentment, raw and simmering, like the coals under the grill. These weren't people ready to rally yet, but they were tired of swallowing their anger. Marisol joined us, setting a plate of food down. She hides behind procedure, sends letters at night so you get them in the morning with your coffee. Always signed in ink, like she's stamping you guilty before you've even read the charge. Her words stuck with me. Procedure, letters, ink. That was Patricia's armor. But armor only protects if it's legal, if it's real. And deep in my gut, I suspected hers was cracked. I stayed late, listening more than speaking. Every laugh sounded forced, every smile dulled. This community once thrived on unity, cookouts, garage sales, holiday parades. Patricia had turned it into a chessboard, every piece under her thumb. By the time I walked home, fireflies blinking across the lawns, my resolve had hardened into stone. Sophia walked beside me, quiet. Finally, she whispered, "Uncle Daniel, what if she doesn't stop?" Her voice carried both fear and shame, the kind no teenager should ever have to bear. I stopped at the edge of the rose garden, the night air thick with their fragrance. I crouched so I could meet her eyes. "Then we make her stop," I said softly. "But we do it the right way. Our way." She nodded, though the tension in her shoulders lingered. I wanted to tell her it would be easy, that Patricia would crumble with one strong push. But lies wouldn't help. What would help was showing her that fear could be answered with strategy. The cicadas had quieted by the time we reached the porch. I could still hear echoes of the neighbors' stories in my head, each one a reminder that Patricia's power thrived on silence. That night, I made a promise, not just to Sophia, but to every person who'd bowed under her weight. She'd written her last threat unchecked. And when I finally shut the front door, I knew the next step wasn't about roses or notices, or even my niece's clothes. It was about cracking open the shell Patricia used to shield herself, exposing whether she had the authority she claimed, or whether it was nothing but paper and ink. The clubhouse smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and stale coffee, the kind of scent that clung to walls after too many board meetings. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum filling the quiet between stiff conversations. A whiteboard leaned against the far wall with HOA updates scrawled across it in thick blue marker. It wasn't an event I wanted to attend, but if Patricia wanted to flex her power in public, I was going to stand in the same room and watch her try. She stood at the front like a queen on her dais, rattling off new reminders about standards with that same rehearsed tone I'd heard on my porch. Most people kept their eyes down, nodding along, too worn out to argue. I stayed near the back, arms crossed, taking it all in. That's when I noticed Marcus Green. He sat to Patricia's left at the long folding table, his hands shuffling papers that didn't seem to need shuffling. He kept pushing his glasses up his nose, even when they hadn't slipped. His pen tapped the edge of his notebook in a nervous rhythm. 1, 2, 1, 2, like a man counting seconds until he could escape. Patricia announced a new initiative about exterior inspections. My jaw tightened. She framed it as a community beautification effort, but I caught the phrase she slipped in, with discretionary authority vested in the board. That was lawyers' bait, sloppy and dangerous. Authority like that couldn't just be declared. It had to be voted, recorded, approved. My instincts screamed she was bluffing again. And Marcus knew it. When Patricia said the words, I caught him freeze. His pen stilled, his gaze flicked down, then away, like he wanted to disappear into the carpet. He didn't agree, but he wasn't speaking. His lips pressed thin, his jaw twitching. He scribbled something, then scratched it out so hard the paper nearly tore. The silence in the room thickened. I shifted my weight, watching him, cataloging every nervous tick. Marcus wasn't just tired, he was conflicted. He had information he didn't want to share, or maybe couldn't. Patricia moved on to pool rules, but my focus stayed on Marcus. He glanced at me once, quick and sharp, then looked away as if burned. That single glance said everything. He knew who I was, he knew I was watching, and he didn't want me to see what was written on his face. Around us, neighbors coughed softly, adjusted in their chairs, whispered about dues, normal meeting chatter. But Marcus was a storm under the surface, his body language betraying a war between conscience and fear. Patricia wrapped up with a thin smile. "We're committed to keeping Willow Creek the most desirable community in the county," she said. Applause rose, half-hearted, scattered. Marcus clapped once, then stopped, hands folding tight together, like he was trying to hold himself in place. I didn't move until the room began to empty. People filed out, some muttering about fines, others pretending not to care. Marcus stayed seated, still stacking and restacking the same 3 sheets of paper. I walked past, slow enough to see the sheen of sweat on his temple. His eyes flicked up, then down again, as if daring himself to speak and failing. "Good meeting," Patricia said to no one in particular, brushing past me with her perfume sharp in the air. Her heels clicked against the tile as she left, satisfied. But Marcus lingered. His pen rolled off the table and hit the floor. When he bent to pick it up, his shoulders slumped like the weight of the entire room had landed there. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I stored the image, the tapping pen, the scratched-out notes, the half-clap, the stolen glance. Proof that Patricia's power wasn't absolute. Proof that someone inside the board knew the truth and hated what they were part of. Outside, night had fallen. Crickets chirped near the hedges, and the clubhouse lights glowed like watchtowers behind me. I breathed in the heavy summer air, the roses from my yard faint on the breeze even from here. I knew then that Marcus Green would matter. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow. But his silence was already cracking, and when it did, it would break Patricia's shield wide open. The trail wound through the neighborhood like a scar, cut between tall pines that blocked the setting sun. I used to come here for quiet, long walks with my son before his illness took those simple joys away. But tonight, the trail wasn't peace. It was stage lighting, and every shadow felt like a spotlight. I wasn't alone. Halfway down, I saw them. 2 board members, neighbors I once traded tools with, now parked off to the side. They didn't wave, they didn't smile, they just stood with their arms crossed, watching. One held a clipboard, as if he was on patrol. I knew what this was. Patricia had escalated. She wasn't content with fines and letters anymore. She wanted intimidation, surveillance, pressure. I slowed, pretending to tie my shoe, giving myself a moment to study them. Their posture wasn't casual, it was calculated. One had his phone angled toward me, the faint glow of the screen reflected in his glasses, recording me. My gut twisted. The trail was supposed to belong to all of us, but right now it felt like enemy territory. I kept walking, deliberately calm. My boots crunched the gravel, echoing too loud in the silence. I could feel their eyes drilling into my back. Then, just as I rounded the bend, I caught another figure up ahead. Patricia herself, leaning against the trailhead sign, arms folded like a queen surveying her land. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The smug tilt of her chin told me everything. I stopped a few feet away. "Evening," I said flatly. Her smile was ice. "We've had complaints about certain homeowners disregarding community standards. I thought I'd check things out personally." My chest tightened, but I forced a slow exhale. "On the walking trail? At dusk? That's community service now?" She shrugged, her gaze flicking past me to where the 2 board members lurked. "We take monitoring seriously. Everyone has to play by the rules, Daniel. Everyone." That word, everyone, was her weapon. A blanket justification for singling me out. But it was too broad, too staged. I tilted my head, memorizing the formation of her little patrol. 2 behind, 1 ahead, me in the middle. A trap. "You're not intimidating me," I said, my voice low. Patricia stepped closer, lowering her tone like she was confiding. "No, because it looks to me like you're standing here, alone. And when rules aren't followed, consequences stack fast. Fines, liens, maybe worse. You really want to gamble with your property? Her words hit hard, but not the way she thought. They weren't just threats, they were admissions. She had orchestrated this scene, turned the trail into her courtroom with herself as judge and jury, and she was careless enough to let it slip in public. I kept my face neutral, though my mind raced. This was exactly the kind of overreach I needed to start threading together. The intimidation wasn't just rumor or hearsay. It was visible, deliberate, and personal. Proof didn't always come on paper. Sometimes it came in posture, tone, and timing, and I was cataloging every detail. "You've made your point," I said, stepping past her. "But remember something, Patricia. Power built on fear doesn't last." She let out a soft laugh, brittle and hollow. "We'll see." I didn't give her the satisfaction of turning back. I walked the rest of the trail with steady strides, even as my heart hammered against my ribs. The evening air carried the faint smell of pine and earth, grounding me in a way her threats couldn't touch. At the far end, when I finally reached the streetlight glow of the cul-de-sac, I stopped. I took out my phone, not to record, but to jot down everything while it was fresh. Their positions, their words, their body language. Dates, times, witnesses, even hostile ones, could matter later. My old engineering habit of precision became my weapon now. Data, detail, documentation. Patricia thought intimidation would rattle me into mistakes. Instead, she just handed me the first brick in the wall I was going to build against her. The sky deepened to purple as I headed home, steps heavy but steady. The trail wasn't safe anymore, but in her arrogance, Patricia had given me something she didn't realize, evidence born from her own overconfidence. I knew then, this wasn't just about fines or rules anymore. This was about control. And if she wanted a war of pressure, I'd answer with precision. Every encounter, every slip of her tongue, every stage performance on public ground, I'd turn it into fuel. She thought I was alone on that trail. But I walked out carrying more than fear. I carried her mistake. The lab had always been my refuge. Rows of circuit boards, humming servers, and schematics pinned along the walls created an order that the neighborhood lacked. Here, nothing slipped by unnoticed. Every system left a trace. Every design revealed its flaws. I came in early, long before my team, and dropped my briefcase on the steel workbench. My phone still held Patricia's latest threat. A formal notice threatening daily fines if my niece failed to adhere to proper dress standards when outdoors. Her arrogance seeped through every line, but I'd stopped reacting with anger. Now I was searching for weakness. I pulled up the neighborhood's HOA financial disclosures, thin, glossy reports they uploaded to the community portal twice a year. Most residents never glanced at them. I'd skimmed before, but something about Patricia's constant pressure gnawed at me. People that ruthless usually hid something. I spread the pages across my desk, cross-referencing with my own notes. That's when the first inconsistency jumped out. Maintenance budgets for common areas had doubled over 12 months, yet no new projects had been approved. Landscaping charges appeared in blocks, paid to a shell company I didn't recognize. My pulse quickened. In my world, patterns told stories. This one screamed mismanagement, or worse. I leaned closer, jotting calculations on a yellow pad. The vendor's address was a P.O. box. Their services looked like photocopied invoices with generic line items. No specificity, no real scope. It didn't match legitimate engineering contracts I handled daily. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became. Patricia and her board weren't just overreaching with rules. They were bleeding the neighborhood through financial sleight of hand. And if these numbers couldn't stand up to scrutiny, then their authority rested on crumbling ground. I sat back in my chair, staring at the web of figures, my chest tightening. This wasn't about my niece's clothes anymore. This was about a community being exploited by people who counted on silence. I tapped the invoices with my pen, the metal click echoing in the empty room. This was the crack in their armor, not emotional appeals, not neighborly debates, cold, provable, legal violations. For the first time in weeks I smiled. The hum of the servers filled the silence. My own expertise, decades of analyzing data for integrity, tracing irregularities in system design, auditing technical compliance, suddenly aligned with my personal war. I wasn't just a homeowner fighting a dress code. I was an engineer pulling apart their machine, exposing the hidden wiring, and I knew exactly where it would short. I pulled up the HOA bylaws from the state registry, scrolling through clauses. They required transparent vendor contracts, open board records, and annual independent audits. But there was no sign an audit had been conducted. Patricia and her circle had either skipped it or buried it. Both options were violations. Both options could collapse their authority if exposed properly. My fingers hovered over the mouse as I cross-checked dates. Yes, the audit deadline had passed 3 months ago. No filing, no mention in meeting notes. They thought no one would notice. A surge of adrenaline ran through me, sharper than any cup of coffee. For the first time since Patricia had cornered us, I felt the scales tilt. Their power was only as strong as our ignorance. And I wasn't ignorant anymore. I printed copies, highlighting critical sections, and slid them into a black binder. Each page felt like a weapon. By the time my team filtered into the lab, I'd packed the binder away, calm on the surface, storm beneath. None of them knew that today's engineering project wasn't electronic. It was legal, tactical, and personal. Leaving the lab, I felt the morning air slap me awake. Patricia thought she was writing the script, but I'd found the stage direction she didn't want anyone to see. This wasn't going to end in petty fines or smug letters. It was going to end with accountability. For my niece, for the neighbors too scared to speak, for every quiet homeowner who'd ever swallowed injustice because they thought they lacked the tools to fight back. I had the tools. I just needed the right moment to use them. That evening, binder in hand, I paused before pulling into my driveway. Kids rode bikes past the oak tree at the corner, the one my father had planted before I was born. Legacy stood taller than Patricia's arrogance. I looked at the darkened HOA office across the street. Lights off, but blinds slightly tilted, as if someone watched even in silence. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. They thought intimidation worked, but soon it would be their own numbers, cold, factual, undeniable, that turned against them. And I was ready to deliver the blow. The porch creaked under my weight as I leaned against the railing, binder balanced on my lap. Evening shadows stretched across my sister's yard, and the cicadas hummed like a warning I couldn't quite decipher. My niece sat on the steps, tying and retying her sneakers, pretending not to care about Patricia's latest letter. But the way her hands trembled betrayed the truth. Patricia had crossed a line this time. The notice didn't just threaten fines, it suggested further disciplinary action if she failed to comply with community attire expectations. She was 16, a kid trying to grieve her mother and exist in peace, and now an HOA officer thought she could dictate her wardrobe. I took the paper from her and folded it, sliding it into my binder. "Don't worry," I told her, though my chest burned with anger I couldn't fully hide. "This one doesn't stand." She nodded without meeting my eyes, retreating into the house, leaving me alone with the dim porch light flickering above. That light had always been my sister's favorite. She'd insisted on keeping it warm yellow, not the harsh white the HOA approved. Another quiet rebellion, another scar Patricia hadn't forgiven. I thought I was alone until I heard a sharp voice drift over the hedge. "Patricia." I froze, listening. She wasn't talking to me. Her tone was low, urgent, the cadence of someone who thought secrecy made them invincible. "Marcus, you need to stop hesitating. If you keep questioning our process, I'll have no choice but to put your position up for review. Do you understand me?" Silence followed, broken by the faint scrape of shoes on gravel. Then Patricia again, sharper. "This community needs unity. I won't tolerate dissent. Either you back me publicly or you're out." The line clicked off. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I'd stumbled into something raw and undeniable. Marcus Green, our supposedly neutral treasurer, wasn't her ally. He was her hostage. That explained the nervous glances, the hesitation in meetings, the way his hands twitched when she spoke. He wasn't conflicted by accident. He was being cornered, same as the rest of us. I shifted on the porch, careful not to make the boards groan. The power dynamic was cracking, and I'd just seen it firsthand. Patricia wasn't as untouchable as she wanted everyone to believe. She ruled by fear, by isolation, by silencing anyone who questioned her. But fear couldn't withstand daylight. I had her financial discrepancies, and now I had proof of her bullying tactics. The key wasn't just exposing the numbers, it was showing the human cost, the intimidation that kept people quiet. I sat in the dark for a long while after, binder pressed against my chest. My father's oak tree swayed across the street, its leaves whispering in the breeze. He'd taught me that systems, no matter how rigid, were built by people, and people could always be challenged. Patricia thought rules were her weapon, but rules cut both ways. If she had failed to maintain audits, if she had funneled money into shadow companies, then the very statute she wielded would be the rope around her neck. The screen door squeaked open behind me. My sister stepped out, eyes tired, holding 2 mugs of tea. She didn't ask what I'd been doing. She didn't need to. We sat together in silence, steam curling upward. After a while, she whispered, "She won't stop until she breaks us." I looked at her, then at the binder, then at the letter I'd tucked inside. "Then she's going to learn what happens when you push the wrong family." My words weren't loud, but they carried the weight of certainty. This wasn't just resistance anymore. Tonight proved there was no safe middle ground. Marcus was cracking under her pressure, my niece was her target, and the neighbors were too scared to act. I couldn't wait for someone else to step forward. The decision hardened in me like cooling steel. I would bring Patricia's empire down, brick by brick, using the very foundations she'd ignored: numbers, bylaws, and audits. Her arrogance had left her blind to the simple truth that the law doesn't vanish just because she pretends it does. As the night deepened, I gathered my binder and stood. The porch light flickered again, casting shadows across the yard. I took it as a sign. Patricia thought she was the only one watching. She was wrong, and soon the whole community would see her for what she really was. Marcus's garage smelled faintly of motor oil and old cedar. A single bulb swung overhead, throwing long shadows across stacked boxes and a half-finished workbench project. He'd invited me in through the side door, his eyes darting. Down the street first, like a man expecting to be followed. When the door shut behind us, he leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. "I shouldn't be doing this," he muttered, voice barely above a whisper. His hands trembled just enough for me to notice. I set my binder on the workbench without opening it. "You wouldn't have called me if you weren't ready." He didn't respond right away, just rubbed the back of his neck, the bulb casting hard lines across his face. Finally, he exhaled, like a balloon losing air. "She's gone too far, threatening your niece. That was the last straw." The words carried weight. This wasn't idle gossip, it was confession. I stayed quiet, letting him fill the silence. "She controls everything," Marcus said, pacing a narrow strip between the boxes. "Board meetings, budgets, vendor contracts, even the minutes we're supposed to publish. Half of what you see on the portal is rewritten before it's uploaded. She's terrified someone will notice the gaps. I've tried to push back, but Patricia, she doesn't argue. She threatens. First it was my voting rights on the board, then my property violations. Last week she said she'd come after my wife's business license if I didn't cooperate." His voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment he looked less like a treasurer and more like a prisoner. I opened the binder slowly, turning it toward him. "These invoices, the landscaping vendor, you've seen them?" He gave a bitter laugh. "Seen them? I signed half of them, or rather, I signed where she told me. They're fake, Daniel. I don't even know if that company exists. Patricia uses a third party to shuffle the money. Nobody on the board asks questions anymore. They're too scared." The confirmation hit harder than I expected. I'd suspected fraud, but suspicion wasn't enough. Hearing it from the treasurer himself, that was dynamite. "And the audits?" I asked. He froze, then lowered his gaze. "There haven't been any, not in 3 years." The garage went still. Even the bulb above seemed to hum louder, buzzing like it understood the magnitude of his words. Marcus rubbed his temple. "You need to understand, if this comes out, it won't just be Patricia who goes down. She'll drag anyone connected to her, and she won't care who burns. That's why I've stayed quiet." I studied him, the way his shoulders slumped under invisible weight. He wasn't a coward. He was a man cornered by a system designed to punish honesty. "You're not quiet now," I said softly. He glanced up at me, something flickering in his eyes. Fear, yes, but also relief. "Because you won't back down. She can bully me, but you're different. You know how to tear this apart the right way." I closed the binder, the snap of the cover loud in the small space. "Then you need to trust me. When the time comes, I'll need your voice. Your position makes this airtight. Marcus hesitated, then nodded once, sharp and decisive. If you can protect my family, I'll stand with you. The garage felt heavier as the bulb swung, casting shadows like prison bars across the walls. But for the first time, those shadows didn't just represent fear. They represented proof, testimony, a way forward. Patricia's empire wasn't built on strength. It was built on silence. And silence had just cracked. When I left Marcus's garage, the night air hit me cold, cutting straight through my jacket. But I felt stronger than I had in weeks. My binder wasn't just a collection of papers anymore. It was a weapon, reinforced by the one person Patricia thought she owned. She didn't own him anymore. And when the board faced the truth, they'd realize she didn't own this community either. The glow of my desk lamp painted the office in a circle of amber light. The rest of the house lost to shadows. My sister and niece had gone to bed hours earlier, but sleep wasn't an option for me. The binder lay open across the desk, pages fanned out like a battle map. Patricia thought her threats could pin us down. She had no idea I was already building the weapon that would undo her. I booted up my computer, fingers drumming against the desk as the system hummed awake. First step, the State Registry for Homeowners Associations. Dry reading for most people, but for me, it was a blueprint. Statutes and bylaws were just another kind of circuit, interdependent, logical, and full of vulnerabilities if you knew where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. Scrolling through the statute, my eyes landed on the keyline I remembered. All registered HOAs were required to conduct annual independent audits if revenues exceeded a threshold. Ours did, by a wide margin. The law wasn't optional, it was mandatory. Patricia had skipped 3 consecutive years. Each omission wasn't just negligence, it was a breach of fiduciary duty. That meant her authority to fine, to enforce, even to sit as president, could be challenged. I leaned back, heart pounding. The legal trap was so simple it almost felt insulting. She'd built her empire on the assumption that nobody would notice, that no one would bother cross-checking the statutes against her hollow financial reports. But I wasn't just anyone. I pulled Marcus's testimony notes closer, his words still echoing in my mind. No audits in 3 years. Combined with the fake invoices and shell vendor, this wasn't speculation. It was evidence. A court or state regulator wouldn't care about Patricia's threats, her posturing, or her smug smirks at board meetings. They would care about the law, and the law was clear. I opened a spreadsheet, lining up every report from the HOA portal against statutory deadlines. Red cells marked each missed audit, a trail of failure stretching across the screen. Then I layered in the suspicious vendor charges, highlighting duplicates and unexplained jumps. By the time I finished, the spreadsheet looked less like financial data and more like a crime scene. I saved the file, backing it up twice. Patricia loved to intimidate with her presence. I preferred the quiet permanence of hard evidence. But the strategy couldn't stop at discovery. I had to plan the release. A direct confrontation now would give her time to cover her tracks. She'd bury Marcus, fabricate backdated audits, maybe even shred the records entirely. Timing was everything. I scribbled a timeline on a notepad. Step 1. Secure Marcus's formal statement, notarized if possible. Step 2. Present the discrepancies at a public board meeting where Patricia couldn't twist the narrative behind closed doors. Step 3. If the board stalled, escalate immediately to the state's HOA regulatory body. The sequence needed to leave her no room to maneuver, no chance to reframe her crimes as mistakes. My pulse steadied as the plan came together. This wasn't chaos anymore. It was precision. Patricia had relied on fear and manipulation, but systems only bend to those who understand them, and I understood this one better than she ever would. I paused, rubbing my temples, the quiet hum of the computer filling the room. My niece's letter sat tucked in the binder, the one accusing her of violating dress standards. It felt almost absurd now, knowing the scale of what Patricia had tried to bury. But that letter was still the spark, the insult that lit the fire, and it reminded me that behind every line, item, and statute, real people were suffering. My niece, Marcus's family, neighbors who avoided eye contact because they were afraid. I reached for the oak carving my father had made, a small keepsake that sat on the corner of my desk. He'd carved it from the same tree that still stood at the street corner, solid, enduring, unyielding. His voice echoed in my memory. Systems are only as strong as the people who defend them. I closed the binder with finality. Patricia's reign was already ending. She just didn't know it yet. Tonight, the pieces of my counterplan locked into place. Numbers, statutes, testimony, all aligned like circuitry. And once current flowed through, there would be no stopping the cascade. The coffee shop was busy enough that no one would notice us, but quiet enough that I could spread papers across the table without drawing too much attention. The hiss of the espresso machine, the low hum of conversation, the clink of mugs, it all blended into a kind of background cover. I set my laptop down, sliding the folder beside it, and tried to shake off the nerves that had been riding me since Marcus slipped that statement under my office door. Tonight wasn't about chance. It was about precision. Marcus came in first. He looked around, spotted me, then hesitated. His shoulders slumped like he wanted to bolt. But then he exhaled, pulled the chair back, and sat down across from me. "You sure this is safe?" He muttered, his voice low. His eyes flicked toward the counter where a barista was steaming milk. "As safe as it gets," I said, leaning forward. "No one here cares what we're doing. Besides, Patricia can't monitor every coffee shop in town. You signed the statement? You ready to back it up?" He swallowed, nodding. "I had to. She's been threatening me for months, trying to drag me into things I wanted no part of. But if she finds out I've flipped..." "She won't," I cut him off. "You're not flipping. You're telling the truth. That matters. And I'll make sure the board hears it the right way." Just then, Lena and Rob came in. They weren't part of my inner circle before, but after Patricia's latest stunt at the barbecue, they'd reached out. They'd each been on the receiving end of her intimidation tactics. We'd agreed this was the moment to compare notes. I waved them over, and soon the four of us were squeezed around a table built for two, steam rising from fresh mugs of coffee. Lena pulled out her phone and showed me photos of letters Patricia had taped to her door. She left these when I didn't cut back my roses, said the board would fine me $100 a day if I didn't comply. Thing is, I checked the bylaws. There's nothing about rose bushes. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. I felt like I was losing my mind. Rob leaned in. Same thing with me. She claimed my shed wasn't painted the approved color. I bought this house from the last owner 5 years ago. It's the same color it's always been. She still slapped me with a violation. I appealed, and she blocked it from ever reaching the board. I kept my expression calm, but inside, my resolve hardened. That's exactly the pattern I needed. False violations, personal intimidation, blocking appeals. Combined with Marcus's testimony and the financial trail I've found, it's a web that proves abuse of authority. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. But what if the board sides with her anyway? You know how tight she keeps them under her thumb. I leaned back, letting the weight of his question hang for a second. Then we take it higher. The law's clear. Boards can't enforce rules outside of their governing documents. They can't hide financial discrepancies, and they can't silence homeowners who push back. I'm not walking into that meeting blind. I'm walking in armed. For the next hour, we worked like a small unit planning a mission. I scanned and organized their evidence, labeling each item in a folder on my laptop. I tucked hard copies into a binder I'd bought just for this purpose. Marcus's signed statement went at the front, sealed in a protective sleeve. Every page, every file, every piece of testimony had to line up seamlessly. Because if Patricia sensed even one crack, she'd drive a wedge into it. The coffee shop grew quieter as people filtered out. Rain tapped against the windows, blurring the glow of the streetlights. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from the clarity of what was at stake. This wasn't just about my niece's dignity anymore. It wasn't about one violation letter or one intimidation tactic. This was about the community I grew up in, the neighborhood where my father taught me what it meant to fight fair and never back down when someone tried to tilt the rules in their favor. As I packed the binder, Lena touched my arm. "You really think we can do this? That she won't crush us like she always does?" I met her gaze. She's already crushed people for too long. This time, she's about to find out what happens when the rules are turned against her. I zipped the binder closed with finality. And trust me, she's not ready for what comes next. We left the coffee shop together, a quiet coalition stepping out into the wet night. My binder felt heavy in my bag, but for the first time, it wasn't a burden. It was a weapon, and Patricia had no idea it was pointed straight at her. The community center smelled faintly of floor polish and burnt coffee when I pushed the door open. Rows of folding chairs had already been set out, though only a handful of them were occupied. The calm before the storm, I thought. Patricia believed this would be another rubber stamp board meeting, but tonight the current was shifting. I wasn't here to disrupt. I was here to anchor everything so the truth couldn't be dodged. I walked the perimeter first, scanning the posted notices on the corkboard wall. Meeting agenda, boilerplate announcements, nothing out of place. But that wasn't what I was checking for. I wanted to make sure Patricia hadn't slipped in some procedural trap, last-minute changes, surprise motions, that could give her an escape hatch. Nothing. Good. I set my leather folder down on a chair in the second row, close enough to be seen, but not so close as to look like I was challenging the board outright. Inside were copies of the HOA bylaws, highlighted sections of Florida's HOA statute, and Marcus's signed statement. I'd cross-referenced every clause until my eyes burned. The hole in their authority wasn't just real, it was wide open. Patricia had been signing off on violation notices without board vote, acting as if her word was law. That was the crack I was going to drive a wedge into. Before anyone else arrived, I adjusted the chairs, subtle but important. I positioned them so that my neighbors who'd quietly pledged support would be directly behind me. When they spoke up, their voices would carry, not get lost at the back. I wasn't choreographing a spectacle. I was making sure the right echoes landed where they needed to. The door creaked, and Marcus slipped in. He looked tired, like the decision to side with me had cost him a week of sleep. Still, when his eyes met mine, there was a flicker of resolve. He gave the smallest nod, then sat 2 rows behind, folding his, hands in his lap. Patricia didn't know he'd flipped. That card would stay close to the chest until it mattered. I unfolded the bylaws one more time, tracing the text with my finger. Any notice of violation shall be issued by majority vote of the board of directors. Clear as day. Patricia had been issuing them solo, leveraging the HOA letterhead as if it were her personal weapon. My niece's clothes had never been the real issue. It was power, control, intimidation. And now I held the rope she'd wrapped around her own neck. Neighbors began filtering in, their conversations low and uneasy. Some avoided me, unwilling to be seen taking sides. Others offered curt nods. A couple of the mothers who'd whispered about Patricia's harassment earlier in the week found seats across the aisle, eyes on me, like they were silently urging me not to back down. The community wasn't united yet, but there was an undercurrent of readiness, the kind that builds before a dam breaks. I checked the clock. 10 minutes until the meeting. Patricia still hadn't arrived. That wasn't surprising. She liked to sweep in last, as if time bent to her schedule. Fine. I used those minutes to spread my materials across the folder, rehearsing the order. First, the statute. Second, the bylaw. Third, Marcus's corroboration. Sequence mattered. It had to feel like an unbroken chain of inevitability. I sipped the bitter coffee someone had left by the urn. My hand was steady. No nerves, just focus. Years in the courtroom had trained me for this exact kind of tension. The quiet stacking of evidence before the decisive strike. Patricia thought this was just a meeting. To me, it was the equivalent of opening statements. When the door finally banged open and Patricia strode in with her usual air of command, the energy in the room shifted. Her smile was thin, her eyes scanning for control, but she didn't notice the small adjustments I'd made, the seating, the papers, the allies scattered in plain sight. She walked straight to the head table, dropped her folder with a slap, and called the meeting to order. I leaned back in my chair, letting her think she was steering. In reality, every detail was already aligned. Tonight wouldn't end the way she expected. Patricia's gavel cracked against the folding table, sharper than it needed to be. "This meeting will come to order," she announced, her voice riding high above the murmurs. She relished that power, commanding a room, silencing dissent. For months she'd wielded it like a weapon. Tonight I let her bask for a moment longer, because soon it would unravel. The agenda moved quickly at first. Routine updates, budget numbers, all delivered with that self-satisfied smile. People shifted in their seats, restless, waiting. I kept still, folder closed on my lap, every detail prepared. My pulse didn't race. I'd been here before, not in this room, but in countless hearings, watching arrogance mistake itself for authority. Patricia was about to learn the difference. Finally, she reached the item. Community Standards Enforcement. She scanned the room like a hawk, then zeroed in on me. Mr. Grant, your household is still in violation. Your niece's attire continues to breach our established dress code, and failure to correct this will result in escalating fines. A few gasps rippled from the audience. Dress code? As if she had jurisdiction over cotton and thread. I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape just enough to draw eyes. With respect, Patricia, you don't have the authority to issue that notice. She laughed, short and cutting. I think you'll find I do. The bylaws are clear. I lifted my folder, flipped it open, and pulled out the highlighted page. My voice stayed level, firm. Article 6, Section 4. Any notice of violation shall be issued by majority vote of the Board of Directors. That vote never happened, which means your notice wasn't just improper, it was invalid. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned sharper, forced. That's your interpretation. I stepped forward, placing the copy of the bylaws on the table in front of her. It's not interpretation, it's the plain language. Florida Statute 72305 echoes the same requirement. You acted alone, and that means every violation you've issued without a vote is unenforceable. The room shifted. Whispers buzzed like bees, neighbors leaning into one another, realization spreading. Patricia tried to gavel them down, but the sound no longer silenced. She raised her chin. This is out of order. Not yet, I said calmly. Because I'm not the only one who knows this. Marcus? All eyes turned as Marcus rose from his seat 2 rows back. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice carried. I serve on this board. Patricia never brought Daniel's case, or several others, to a vote. She issued those notices herself. We weren't consulted. It hit like a crack in a dam. The room erupted, neighbors speaking over each other, some angry, others vindicated. A mother across the aisle stood and shouted, "She fined me for my son's bike! Said it cluttered the porch!" Another voice chimed in, "She threatened to tow my car without approval." The grievances poured out, one after another, and suddenly Patricia wasn't presiding. She was cornered. She pounded the gavel again, desperate. "Order! Sit down! You have no authority to challenge this board." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. That's where you're wrong. The authority lies in the bylaws and the statutes, not in you. And tonight, the community sees that clearly. Marcus handed over his signed statement. I placed it next to the bylaws on the table, neat and deliberate. Evidence, not noise. I didn't have to shout. The truth spoke louder than volume. Neighbors crowded forward, demanding answers. Patricia's smug composure cracked, her cheeks flushed. For the first time, she looked small behind that table. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, an older man with thinning gray hair, finally cleared his throat. Perhaps we should table this matter and review the process. His tone was cautious, but the shift was undeniable. Patricia was losing control, and everyone in the room knew it. I stepped back, let the wave crest. This wasn't just about me or my niece. It was about the community reclaiming the authority Patricia had hijacked. Tonight wasn't victory yet, but it was the turning point. The board had to face its own reflection, and the neighbors had found their voices. I closed my folder and sat, calm amid the storm. Patricia gripped the gavel like it could still save her, but the sound of it was drowned beneath the rising tide of voices. The night air outside the community center carried the faint scent of jasmine, sharp and clean after the storm that had broken indoors. Neighbors spilled out in clusters, voices low at first, then rising with something I hadn't heard in months, relief. The courtyard's lampposts threw long shadows across the brick path, where people lingered, no longer afraid to speak openly. I stepped into the open space, the tension that had wound through me all evening finally unwinding. Patricia had left in silence, her gavel abandoned on the table like a weapon stripped from its owner. The board hadn't formally voted her out, not yet. But the writing was on the wall. They'd admitted the truth. Every notice she had issued alone was void. The fines she'd threatened carried no weight, and the power she'd lorded over this neighborhood had evaporated under the fluorescent lights of her own meeting. My niece ran up to me, eyes bright. "Uncle Daniel, does this mean they can't bother me anymore?" Her voice cracked with the fear she'd carried for weeks. I crouched down, pulled her close, and whispered, No one decides what you wear but you. That's over." She clung to me, and in that moment, all the late nights and preparation melted into something simple. Family protected. Around us, neighbors gathered. The mother who'd spoken about her son's bike reached out and squeezed my shoulder. "You did what we couldn't," she said. Others nodded, voices layering over each other. We were scared. She had us cornered. "Thank you." Their gratitude wasn't just for me, it was for the chance to breathe again. Marcus stepped into the circle, his expression heavy but lighter than before. "I should have spoken up sooner," he admitted. His eyes darted between the group, shame mixing with relief. She made me believe I'd lose everything if I crossed her. But Daniel was right. This community belongs to all of us, not just her. His words drew murmurs of agreement. For the first time, Marcus wasn't isolated. He was part of the neighborhood again. The courtyard had always been symbolic to me. When my father bought this house decades ago, he told me the open square was a place for gathering, for neighbors to see one another as equals. Tonight, under the glow of the lamps, that vision came alive again. The space felt reclaimed, not by one person's authority, but by the voices of many. I looked around, measuring the faces, the subtle shift in posture. People were standing taller, voices stronger. Fear had been replaced with resolve. Patricia's reign of intimidation had ended, but something bigger had started. A community had woken up. As the conversation swelled, I stepped onto the low edge of the fountain that sat at the center of the courtyard. The stone was cool under my shoes, grounding me as I raised my voice. Tonight wasn't about me winning an argument. It was about us taking back what was always ours, the right to fair treatment, the right to live without fear. Patricia acted like she was the law, but we proved that the law is bigger than her. Applause broke out, uneven but strong. Some clapped hesitantly, others with fierce energy. A neighbor called out, "So, what happens next?" I held up the bylaws, still tucked under my arm. "Next, the board must reestablish proper process. Every decision will require a vote, no more unilateral threats. And if we need to, we'll petition for new leadership entirely. Tonight was the first step." The courtyard roared with approval, voices echoing off stucco walls. For the first time in months, I felt the neighborhood alive with unity instead of fear. I drew a long breath, letting it sink in. Protecting my niece had been the spark, but the fire that caught tonight would outlast any single conflict. My father's words echoed in my head, a legacy finally honored. This place is home because we make it so. I looked directly at the circle of faces, neighbors and family, allies and once reluctant witnesses, and I offered them a promise. Patricia picked the wrong house to target, and if anyone tries this again, they'll find we stand together now. Then I turned toward the camera someone had raised at the back of the crowd, the little red light blinking. My voice softened but carried across the courtyard. If you want more stories of homeowners standing up to HOA tyranny, hit subscribe right now, share your story in the comments, and let me know where you're watching from. Because this fight isn't just mine, it's ours. The fountain trickled behind me, steady and unshaken, as the community's voices rose around me. For the first time in a long time, this neighborhood felt like it belonged to its people again.